Hey, hello everybody. Welcome back to this episode of Creating the Future with me, Dr. Brent Simpson. Today's going to be different than most other episodes that we create. In fact, we had a schedule that we were on and an episode we were planning to put out today. And then yesterday, the tragic news of the killing, the murder of Charlie Kirk came out, and there seemed to be a lot of emotions around that and a lot of misunderstanding. And I wanted to be able to speak into that for just a second and hopefully bring some biblical clarity, as so many people are in pain. There's an unsettling in a lot of people's spirits. And these are the kind of things we face in moments like this. And as we know, Charlie Kirk, the public speaker, the activist, the father, the person that so many have followed, was tragically and horribly murdered yesterday while speaking at Utah Valley University at his Prove Me Wrong America Comeback Tour tent there. And let me start with this. And again, this is going to be more raw and real today. I just want to be able to speak to you from a pastor's heart and hopefully bringing some biblical truth that might encourage you and strengthen you during a moment like we are in, and maybe bring some clarity around what's happening. I don't follow Charlie Kirk closely, and I think it's important that I start there. I haven't studied all of his writings. I haven't read his blogs. I don't read his speeches. Basically, I see his reels that come across my Instagram every once in a while, and I watch parts of them, and I've always enjoyed them. And I just want to say this off the bat. So I cannot speak for everything that Charlie Kirk has ever said, or everything he stands for, because I don't follow him in that way, but I can speak from what I have seen, and that is that he claimed to be a Christian, and from what I could perceive, he always seemed to act as Christian within Christian values, and even as he was on his tent and talking with people, generally he was loving and courteous in the way he responded, and so he seemed to be, from my vantage point, a sort of Christian apologist. I know he was tied in with President Donald Trump a lot. The stuff I watched and saw, which I'm speaking to, is really just him as a Christian apologist, calling us back to Christian values and arguing for Christian values on the college campuses. And from my vantage point, he was incredibly intelligent, mixed with a really incredible quick-wittedness where he's able to respond at a level that most of us might take a long time to process before we could respond, and he was just able to quickly respond. And I do appreciate that about him, and I think he seemed to carry the Christian faith well, as far as I could tell, as he would walk into some really dark areas and give responses to people's questions about his faith, his Christianity, and obviously his politics sometimes. And so all followers of Jesus are imperfect. There's none of us that are perfect. But I do think that he did a good job and seemed to live his life well. And it is a horrible tragedy on our society of the way he was murdered. And I feel for him and his wife and his two young kids. And only being 31 years old, I feel for their family and what they're going to go through in the future. So tonight, as you watch this, and I know so many people are hurting and worried, I want to lean into some biblical reflections that I think can encourage us not to judge, but to mourn, not to politicize, but to see what the Bible can teach us in a moment like this, what I feel the Spirit is saying, and I'm going to share that a little bit more deeply in a few moments. But and to ask the question, what do we do when somebody who we perceive as standing up for truth is ruthlessly murdered for standing up for that truth? At least that's the way it appears at this moment. So this public killing actually has some aspects of it that I think are quite biblical, I think very biblical in their motivations. And I think Charlie Kirk's story is oddly similar to a few biblical stories that I'm going to pull up and share with you in just a second. So first, I want you to understand that truth always invites conflict. If we are going to be people who stand up for truth, then it's going to invite the conflict of people who disagree with that. Yet we have to be those people who stand up for truth, and I think that's what Charlie Kirk was doing in his meetings. Jesus would tell us in John 15:18, he would say, "If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first." There's this expectation, we'll come back to in a second, that we should expect the world to hate us. We should not expect to be friends with the world. If we're going to stand up for godly biblical truth, darkness just doesn't like light. Now, that does not mean that all criticism and opposition is righteous by any means, and it doesn't mean that every enemy of yours that hates you is because you're standing for truth, but it does mean that we should not be surprised that when we do stand up for truth, we're going to be attacked. If you're going to be a truth teller, you're going to be attacked for telling that truth. And there's a danger because when people can't win arguments, when they can't fight against truth with arguments, it tends to disturb them deeply inside and discomfort them deeply inside, and mentally they get frustrated. And if their error is exposed, when you pull back the cover, so to speak, to reveal what's underneath, when you turn the light on, the roaches scatter. When you can't argue well for your side, you tend to then lash out, and it becomes, first of all, it usually becomes violent verbally and yelling because you can't articulate yourself well. And there's a frustration inside of you because of that, and because you're not, you can see that your side is wrong. So you verbally try to manipulate and control. And then if it goes long enough, it actually goes to physical altercations, whether that's physical fights or, in the case of Charlie Kirk, a murder. And so it gets physical. And I think we have to recognize that first and foremost. Listen, there's a danger for standing up for truth. We know it in the Bible. And people will try to silence the truth in the most tragic ways because the truth is getting involved, is hurting the lifestyle that they want to live. It seems to be wounding them in some regard. And now here's the thing that I want us to start looking at now biblically. I think Charlie Kirk stories have echoes of the past and prophetic tradition, biblically speaking. Years ago, one of the very first times, very long time ago, one of the very first times that God started speaking to me deeply in the Word of God, I had just gotten saved. I was trying to chase after the Lord. And I remember reading the story of John the Baptist. And John the Baptist is fighting against Herod, not fighting against, I should say, but speaking out against Herod, because Herod is essentially sleeping with his brother's wife, his sister-in-law. He's taking her to be his wife. And John the Baptist is standing up and saying, hey, that is wrong. And I want you to see this. John the Baptist is murdered for saying that is wrong. Now, ultimately, that's how it played out. He was beheaded simply for standing up for truth amidst a society that did not want to hear the truth. I refuse to listen to you. It's like the person that sticks their fingers in their ear going, la, 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 I'm not listening to you. Herod was doing something wrong. He did not like being called out on doing something wrong, and that ultimately is what led to John the Baptist's death. Now, we could talk about the way he specifically died, but Herod's the one who's arresting him and eventually leads to his deaths. Now, these deaths are ugly, they are violent, they are unjust, absolutely, but they sort of have to be expected. Now, again, years ago, I'm reading that story of John the Baptist, and I remember it like jumping off the page to me as a young man, and the Holy Spirit deeply impressing on me that there will come a day in my lifetime where this will happen again. That people who speak the truth will be so hated that they will be killed for speaking the truth. Now, we could look at a Martin Luther King Jr., right? He was hated for speaking the truth, or a Charlie Kirk. And I'm not trying to put Charlie Kirk in the same category necessarily as Martin Luther King Jr., and definitely not in the same category as John the Baptist. But people with a prophetic calling typically look at things that are wrong and they try to make it right. And they're going to be the tip of the spear, so to speak. They're going to be out front, and they're going to be hated by the world, and persecution's going to come. And as the Lord spoke to me years ago, we're seeing it in our day and age today, that just because you stand up for truth is going to cause these moments of pushback, of fighting and hatred towards you, not because you're doing anything wrong, but just because you're standing for truth, which again is what Jesus told us would happen. If you were to go to Matthew chapter 5, verse 10 through 12, let me just read it for you. Jesus says these words, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, falsely say all kinds of things against you. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Now get this. I would argue that the calling that, and maybe the office in the fivefold ministry that a Charlie Kirk had was prophetic. Therefore, he's standing out, calling things back into order, calling sin wrong. I think he was doing it as lovingly as possible. I think he was in a very hectic environments a lot, and he did it with great articulation for sure. But people are going to hate him for doing that. And Jesus literally says that you should expect it and you should celebrate in it, because Jesus was persecuted for doing some of the same things. And so were the Old Testament prophets. And so were even modern prophets like a Martin Luther King Jr., right? You're going to be persecuted. And if it brings any peace to your soul for Charlie Kirk, just don't miss the first verse that I read right there in Matthew 5:10. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Let that sink in your own spirit as you deal with his passing, because he is now in the ultimate expression of the kingdom of heaven, or at least it would seem that way from our perspective. Now, he would stand up so often and say, prove me wrong. And I love this posture. I appreciate this posture. And I think this is a posture that you and I have to some degree. As a Christian apologist myself, I would argue that all of us have some type of apologetic responsibility, that we have to be able to reply to people when they are asking questions about our faith, pushing back against our faith, or saying, why do you believe this? And why do you think it should be this way? They might say it in a nasty, ugly way, but I think we have to be people with a prophetic responsibility who can respond back to them in, like the famous way he would say it, Charlie Kirk, you would say, prove me wrong. He once even said, we must speak even when the cost is high. And we have no idea if he knew what would happen to him, if he had any inkling that this was possible or a realistic problem that could happen in his assassination, his killing, his murder. But I do think he at least understood the cost of what he was doing, because as a Christian, I don't know how he couldn't have. And then just facing the constant barrage of verbal assault that he would face, I don't know how he couldn't have. So I encourage you, pray for him, pray for his family, pray the deep encompassing presence of God over his family, over his children as they are now raised without their biological father. Pray that they would be comforted. Within the public discourse of all this, I would encourage you to reject all violence. If you're not careful, there's going to be one or two, and I'm just going to be bold and say, idiots on your timeline who are going to be ugly about this and say he got what he deserved. The worst thing you can do is start trying to argue with the 1% of the population who are acting like fools. You're actually making a mountain out of a molehill. You're taking a small percentage of people and making their voice louder by repeating them when you're trying to respond back to them. So I would be very cautious of that. And then for all the church people, I think I want to go here for just a second as we get ready to wrap up and give another biblical anchor, because I think that Charlie Kirk's life should inspire us to actually embolden our faith and speak out against sin in our society, wrongdoing in our society, with articulation and grace at the same time as we speak out. So in Acts chapter 7, the very end of Acts chapter 7, Stephen is stoned for preaching the gospel, and Paul is one of the famous people who was there as part of the stoning process, giving his approval of what happens. And Stephen has the stoning. He looks up to heaven, sees Jesus at the right hand of the Father. All that happens. But don't miss what happens immediately after. And let me just read it to you, because you may not know it off the top of your head. So Acts chapter 7 ends with the stoning of Stephen. Acts chapter 8 begins with these words, and I read to you. On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. So Stephen is stoned. All of a sudden, this persecution breaks out, and everybody starts fleeing. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him, but Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison. But watch verse 4. Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. Philip went down to a city in Samaria, proclaimed the message there. When the crowds heard Philip and saw the sign he performed, they all paid close attention to what he said. For with shrieks impure spirits came out of many, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. So there was great joy in the city. This is what I want you to see. When Stephen was stoned, the church actually scattered, which is, by the way, what Jesus told them to do in the first place, to scatter and go into all the world with the gospel. Now they actually did what Jesus told them, and they were emboldened because of the persecution to actually stand stronger. Now, I would say the same thing for you. If you are a Christian, we are called to stand for truth no matter what adversity comes against us, no matter the pain, no matter the threats, no matter the verbal assaults, or even in the worst cases, literal physical assaults that could kill you. We are called to stand for truth. And I pray that this horrible tragedy with Charlie Kirk would actually be something that emboldens us to stand up. Stand with people like Charlie Kirk, the modern prophets in our society, call out sin lovingly, gently, correctly, graciously, but stand for truth, call out sin where it needs to be called out. And you and I would be full of boldness. We would be emboldened together to actually stand up for truth. And I pray that that would be a case with you. The last thing I'll say about this too, and I already mentioned it, Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The last thing I'll say here is that as Christians, death is not the end. Death is going to be to every one of us. And we would see death as just a corridor to the next life. And so we don't need to fear death. We don't even need to be sorrowful when it happens to some degree, although obviously we will miss people, and in Charlie Kirk's case, we will miss the prophetic nature of his calling and what he brought to this world. But we need to be able to step back and recognize that our joy is that we get to one day be with the Lord in heaven, and there should be a part of each one of us that longs for that day. While we're not suicidal or kamikaze in any sense, we should be longing for a day that we get to be with the Lord and not so in love with this world that we miss that. So I just encourage you with those words. Let's be people that understand our home is in heaven, and let's be people that also understand and are emboldened to stand up for truth and speak truth the way that we appreciate Charlie Kirk doing. So where do we go from here? Well, with grief, of course, it's going to be painful. We can look around and say, what's wrong with the world? But this is the world that we should expect to some degree, because we have to be salt and light within it to bring correction where it needs to be. We go forward with reflection, not rushing to false conclusions, but holding to truth. I frequently tell our staff in these moments, we don't want to be people who react. We want to be people who respond. When we react, we almost always regret it later on. So let's prayerfully, thoughtfully respond as we hear the Spirit speaking to us and guide people in what to do next. I think we respond with, we move forward with vigilance, not fear, but alertness to the kind of society we are becoming, the kind of society we are. And then I think we move forward with love, for ultimately at the foundation of all of it, the reason why Charlie Kirk should be doing his meetings and standing up for truth is because of a love for people and caring for them. That would drive all the things that go on. Now, Charlie Kirk's life, imperfect though it certainly was, without a doubt, it challenged many of us, and we need to be thankful for that. So let's honor that by refusing to allow fear into our lives, by allowing us to challenge others, to stand up for truth, to call things out that are wrong when they are wrong in the appropriate manner, never letting fear or anger control us, or silence control us, or a spirit that would keep us from moving forward. But let's stand for truth. Let's speak the truth, even when the cost is high and even when danger is on the horizon. So thank you for listening to this episode of Creating the Future today. It's been very different than our normal episodes, but I also pray that it's touched you. I pray that it's helped you to maybe get some biblical understanding and some encouragement as you walk through this difficult season. So if you are hurting, feel free to reach out. I always love to see your comments, so do me a favor, leave a comment. As always, make sure you like and subscribe below. I would love for you to do that. If you're listening to this on Spotify or some kind of podcast platform, do me a favor and give a 5-star rating so other people can get this kind of content as well. But I pray for you that God would give you strength and peace and comfort as you process through this tragedy in your own way. God bless you. Thanks for being a part of this special edition of Creating the Future today.